Apparently, the order of service for the King's coronation has been delayed, and the printing of the booklets has been delayed because the Archbishop of Canterbury, presumably, and the people to be consulted have been quibbling over the King's desire for a more inclusive service that reflects the faith of the United Kingdom rather than simply the faith of the Anglican Church. Now, actually, the quibbling is rather absurd because there are two parts to the coronation. We can go back to the late Queen's coronation in the early 1950s, 1953, and there, demonstrably, there are two parts. The first part is the contract between the Queen and the government, and the second part is the coronation ceremony, which is an updating of the Catholic ceremony, which in turn is based on the Jewish ceremony and the anointing of a king, the sacred anointing of the king of the Jews in Jerusalem. And but even in that ceremony, there was a role for the moderator of the General Assembly of the Free Church of Scotland, the moderator of the General Assembly of Scotland, there we are, got it right, who I think presented a Bible. And it doesn't really matter what that role was, but that was clearly not the Anglican Church. When the Queen was in Scotland, she was a member of the Presbyterian Church. She was head of the Presbyterian Church. When she's in England, she's head of the English Church, and the same thing is true of the King. So it's not inconceivable for the Anglican Church to accommodate other denominations and other religions within the scope of the coronation service, and indeed also to accommodate this political role, a political role which goes back to, first of all, the Reformation, when Henry VIII divorced from the Catholic Church, the first Brexit, to 1689, the Glorious Revolution, and the agreement between the monarch and Parliament, the consolidation of the Protestant rule, and the use of ceremony as a metaphor, as a symbol of power, to pick up Burke's imagery, that ceremony is the decent ceremony, the decent draperies of ceremony. Hide the mechanics, veil the mechanics of power, and that may well explain why we've had such a largely peaceful relationship between the people and power, because we're not flag waving. The flag, in a way, is a secondary image of power, whereas it's a primary image of power in almost every other country. In Britain, the image of power is the king, is the monarch. And that's a sort of bumbling charm to it. And because it comes with a personality, because it comes with a personal image, it comes with its own failings and its own positives and negatives. And I think the different religions and the non-religious in our country can salute the ceremony that hides, that veils the mechanics of power, because the mechanics of power, I'm afraid, have been rather too noticeably on display in the grinding thrust of Brexit. It couldn't have been otherwise. And I will continue to criticize the government from both sides. I will continue to criticize the government for not having put forward a decent Remain campaign. I certainly would hold Cameron responsible for that. But equally, I would hold Mrs. May responsible and Cameron responsible for not overseeing an immediate and effective Brexit. And then I think, frankly, I am inclined to agree with some of the rhetoric of Anne Widdecombe, if not certainly not all of it. I mean, Anne Widdecombe, after all, was the euphemism I used for visiting the loo. And I think very appropriately so too. But the established religion of the UK is something that I think could have been used to hide the nastiness of Brexit. And we needed that image of stability. We still don't have that image of stability. And it's around. We have to remember that it was around the monarch that the initial union of our countries was effected. It was only later that we had a political union between Scotland and England, and so the monarch has great centrality, and I think we should look to the monarch for our future relationship with Europe and with other countries. The king clearly is at ease with Europe. It clearly is at ease in Germany and in France. And we should be using that, because it's absolutely clear, in contrast, that many of our politicians are not at ease in Germany and in France, and don't speak the languages, which is extraordinary. I think there's a role for Islam, there's a role for Judaism, there's a role for Catholicism, particularly in the ceremony of the coronation. I think one has to tread very carefully, because it is a ceremony which is steeped in the Christianity that it's proclaimed for much of the last 1,000 years, and before indeed. But its origins in Judaism give an option for the Jewish participation, and its Catholic antecedent allows for Catholic participation, particularly. So those three religions are secure as participants in the modern coronation. Islam, I think, is less secure historically, but I think is very important in our country and should figure in some aspect of the coronation rite. And I think an inspired cleric in the Anglican Church will find a way to effect that. I'm not convinced that the present Archbishop of Canterbury is the best person for that. He seems a little ham-fisted, and he seems to be built in the Theresa May mould, to say one thing to mean another, and to say something that can have 3 or 4 different meanings. That is not truthful, and that is not actually ecumenical or interfaith. That's simply deceptive. But let's hope there is a proactive, positive, and honest way for a multi-faith proclamation of the new king.